Councilman, yes, please take a seat.
Commander. I think I'm a commander.
He's commander. He's still councilman though, at heart. Regular session, Mayor and City Council meeting, 6 p.m. Okay, just a little after. Wednesday, it won't happen again. Wednesday, January 9th, 2019, City Hall Complex. I call this meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Madam Clerk, will you please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Since we don't have anybody for invocation, we're going to pass the invocation this time around. Well, next time we will have it. Or either that, we're going to have a moment of silence. Item D, call to the public. Do we have anybody, Madam Clerk?
I don't have anything.
Is there anybody that wants to say anything before we move? Huh? Give you a chance. That's it. Item E, presentation. Presentation of retirement plaques, and I'm going to let the directors do that, and we'll do the presentation for, I believe, Pedro Garcia. So, Director, please.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Francisco Padilla, Director of the Housing Authority. And I'm here to present a plaque of recognition to Pedro Garcia for his 21 years of service at the housing. He has been there working as most of the time as an inspector of the housing, so he had a very challenging job there when he was there, keeping all tenants in order and the buildings, and so he has been a loss for us because with his experience and knowledge on the inspection and maintenance of the buildings, so we're going to need another expert in that area. So it's a big loss for us, but we understand it comes to time that everybody wants to have a break after many years of working, so he deserves this retirement. Pedro, please.
All right, Pedro.
Recognition of the housing, I present to you this plaque. Thank you very much for your service and dedication to the Housing Authority to the City of Nogales.
Thank you, Frank.
Pedro, where's your cowboy?
Oh! Congratulations. Enjoy your retirement. Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Qué bueno que no le vas a dar carrilla a la Katy.
Sí, sí. Con el inquilino.
Congratulations, Pedro.
Muchas gracias.
¿Quieres tomar una foto? Sí, seguro que sí. Please? No, come on. Everybody stand up. We all take a picture with him right here, behind him. Who's going to take the photo? Why it's been?
Everybody takes your time.
I'm not getting, maybe this way, Mrs.
Vete para acá.
This way, but you're not behind Pedro.
Mr. Rojas?
This way?
Yeah.
There you go. Pedro, muchas gracias.
Dijo que nomás me faltaban cambiando para que estuviera
Members of the City Council, I move to go into executive session.
Second.
What about Ernesto Rendon?
He's not here.
Oh, he's not here?
here.
Oh, I saw it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I should have mentioned that.
Yeah.
Is it okay?
I second.
Oh, no, no, it's okay, but I just,
Yeah.
just to read why we're going into executive session there so that everybody knows that.
Okay. All right, well, we have a second on it?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Mayor,
All right.
I gave that.
So do we have a motion on, do we have a vote on it, executive session? And I'll read it.
Yeah.
Okay, we do? Yes?
Yes.
All of you? Okay. Pursuant to ARS 38-431.03, A, 3, and 4, the Mayor and City Council will meet in executive session to receive legal advice with its attorneys and instruct its attorneys regarding its position in settlement discussions with Keno Springs Golf Course regarding overcharges of irrigation water. With that, we go into executive session. We'll be right back. Who's the attorney at?
Ready, sir, whenever you're ready.
Very good.
Mr. Felix?
Right here. So Attorney, we're back from an executive session. The only thing I can say about that, we'll be bringing it back on a study session. You will be, I guess, talking to Mr. Massey about this later.
That's correct. Thank
Okay. And I make a motion on consent agenda, item G, consent agenda.
you. So move.
Second. Do I have a vote on this one?
No. Yeah, let's say.
On consent agenda? Yes. Yes. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay. H, orders. Consideration possible action of order 2019-01-001.
Motion to approve order 2019-01-001.
So moved.
Second.
Second. Discussion?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just on this, to make sure that we're clear on this, Mr. Para, then this means that since the mayor and council are making this appointment, that any meetings, interviews, or anything that's handled with this is under the open meeting law, and the press and anybody can attend the interview sessions. Anything that has to do with the screening of the applicants, it is open to the public. Is that correct, Mr. Pana?
It is, of course.
I just want to make sure that it's our appointment, so it's governed under the open meeting law. That's all I just want the public to make
Well,
sure.
my concern is just giving the city manager the authorization also to select the committee that's going to be, or the board that's going to be doing the interviews of the candidates for the position.
Yes,
So,
this is
he'll
his
be-
recommendation.
Yes.
But we're making the legal
Yes,
appointment of
yes,
it. So
yes.
it's governed under the open meeting law.
Yes, it is.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, call for the question.
Okay. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
It was called for the question. No more. Okay. Item I, ordinances. I mean, no, wait a minute. B,
Table.
B.
Motion to table item B, Mr. Mayor?
Yes. Okay, go ahead. I second it.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nay, nobody nays, okay. I, ordinances. A, consideration possible action or ordinance 2019-01-001. City Attorney.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, Council, we have had to take up some issues in the course of this past year that have been brought to the attention of the city relating to dilapidated buildings and not being able to quickly move on these matters from an administrative standpoint. Our building code or our building ordinance, the City of Nogales building and safety codes, allowed us to proceed from the standpoint of a misdemeanor for violations, but the predicament for the city is not being able to have a lien in case placed against the property owners in case the city has to proceed and clear the dilapidated building with city funds. So this amendment to the ordinance will allow us to file civil complaints and/or administratively remove these dilapidated buildings and then follow up with a lien for the costs incurred.
Is this basically the amendment? Is that also because we did previously, yeah, I mentioned it to you with the past city attorney and during my last administration, we talked about this issue and we had brought it up. At that time, we didn't do that in reference to the liens and everything, but we did talk about taking care of these buildings and addressing it or contacting the owners of the property so that they could do something about it. Is this basically follow up on that or no? Is it?
Mr. Mayor, perhaps some policies and procedures were put in place back then
Yes.
with respect to follow through with landowners. I believe that's what
That's what it was?
happened.
Okay.
However, an amendment, an official amendment to the ordinance was never passed.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead, Councilman.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I mean, in 1 year, if you remember, Mayor, we set aside $50,000. What happened is that we could lien the property. The problem was we never got down to it to say we only have $50,000. What property are we going to go ahead and start with? And that was a problem. But I thought that there was never a problem as to liening the property. The problem was that we lien the property and it cost us $50,000. Now what do we do? Right? That's it. You shot the whole deal and that was it. Right? So, but as far as I know, like you said, you couldn't file any criminal. Can you file criminal if somebody has something, a building that could possibly create a big problem for the city that could pull down electrical wires or whatever? Can you go ahead and force the people to go ahead and do something, or does the state statutes contradict? Because most states have very strong statutes against the cities or whatever taking over properties or doing something that they consider is not right, is not for the whole good of the whole community. So I mean, well, right now, if we decide to pick one piece of property and say that piece of property's got to be torn down, can that legally be done and really force a person? Or if they say we're not going to do it, can we tear it down and then lien the property? Is that what it is? I thought that's the way we could have done it before, but.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Hanesian, to try and address your the questions. In essence, what we had before is a means to proceed with the Class 2 misdemeanor where violations occurred, and we of course had to comply with procedural and due process concerns, substantive and procedural due process concerns as set out by state statutes. And then there's also a process that we could have moved on from a civil standpoint with complaints and what have you in Superior Court. But it would have been it's a difficult thing to do because of the it's just a lot lengthier, the procedural method of going through that process. We're basically fast tracking the administrative process with this ordinance, and I don't mean to say that we're going to be surprising people. By no means. We still have to comply with notice provisions to the landowners, and there will be the ability for them to appeal it, but nonetheless it's still a fast track method compared to what we would have to do right now in the situation that you alluded to, which is, all right, the city has $50,000 to take care of a particular piece of property, and that's set aside in the budget. We can proceed to do that, but after we use that $50,000, the procedural method of being able to place that lien is more difficult than proceeding by way of this ordinance, this amendment that we're asking you to consider today.
So this just basically cuts the time, because I have to congratulate, I think, Mr. Dillon here, because there's been several buildings that have been torn down that basically should have been done 10 years ago, right? And I mean, how did you do them? How did you get them done without getting the lien or whatever?
So, Mayor, members of the council, good evening. To answer your question, Councilman Henesian, we had the standard process that was outlined in the 1997 Uniform Code for the Abatement of Dangerous Buildings, which the mayor and council had adopted previously. Essentially what the legal department and I have been working on together is, so that code is pretty vague. The tax lien or the lien on the property is typically the way that the city gets reparations for any costs incurred for the abatement when the city has to step in and take care of those procedures. However, the process that's outlined is really vague, and as Mr. Parra mentioned, can be very lengthy. And in some of the circumstances, I think you guys will remember a couple years ago, the Walter Home building across the street, the exterior wall started to buckle and actually lean into Grand Avenue. That's a very scary situation. Fortunately, we were able to garner the attention of the property owners in a very quick manner and let them know basically how dire the circumstances were, and they stepped in. And they did a partial demolition on the building, but at the time, they stated that they couldn't afford to take part in a full demolition. So, that being said, what we found ourselves in are situations where, there are a number of different criteria that constitute dangerous buildings. Some could just be that openings around the buildings, like windows and doors and things like that, that just need to be boarded up. Those are relatively easy to take care of, and we found that typical property owners will handle those issues, and that'll secure the property from anybody going in and things like that. But situations like the property on 81 North Sonoyta, like where there have been 2 structure fires in 2018, and there's a number of structural members and things like that hanging down, and folks spending time in there. That's called an attractive nuisance. So in situations like that, where we've attempted a number of times to notice the property owners and they've been unresponsive, and then finally, or they have been responsive and they just won't act. When we have something like, $50,000 doesn't cover a lot in terms of abating these violations, but that's a good example of something that would come in right around $50,000 that we know is a hazard. But right now, the mechanism to be able to do that we currently have is just not timely. So we were looking at ways where there's an emergency situation, things like that, to provide extra clarity and an additional mechanism to be able to evaluate situations that might create imminent danger or hazard to the citizens. So we've been fortunate in the ones that we've been able to get knocked down, like the WP Market and the Budget Inn. And there's a resident.
I mean, what letter did you send these people? Because we sent them letters 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 6 years ago. I mean, what finally caught the attention of the railroad? Was there something that we could find the railroad if they didn't knock that down? Because the railroad was advised to knock that down how many years ago? At least 10 years ago, right?
Yeah, that would be the behind the scenes stuff that you don't see. Really, it's a whole lot of letters and a whole lot of emails. I mean, same letter, probably 100 follow-up emails, and lots of phone calls, and the guilt trip of you're not being a good neighbor, and quite a bit of correspondence.
The deal. You're aware of that.
I don't know about that.
Also, what was the same thing happened there in that hotel there over here on Grand Avenue, the one that was knocked down there?
Property owners. It just depends. Really, every situation varies. The one. I've actually been corresponding with the folks at the Walter Home building for the last couple of years, and they want to proceed with it. They know that they should, but it's a huge price tag, and a lot of times these properties are owned by ownership groups, so coordinating all that is really timely and can be a headache, and that's why it's not that the city isn't actively or staff or anybody doesn't actively want to move these forward. It's just that, unfortunately, sometimes it's hard to coordinate that, and there just isn't the will or the finances for the property owners to do it. In the case of the Budget Inn across the street, fortunately, the property owners, once they were notified, it took a little bit of going back and forth, and they They were like, well, this is kind of more expensive than we anticipated, but we said, we'll give you a little bit of time, but we're serious, we need to move on this. This is a really serious problem, this is a blight to the city and a danger to the citizens.
But
So
was anything filed against them?
yeah,
Was there any court procedures filed against them or not?
No, it's just a standard letter issued by the city, issued by the building department.
What does it say?
It's called a notice of order and abatement, and it outlines the violations, or essentially it outlines the criteria of why it would constitute as a dangerous building, and then it outlines the violations of the code sections, and that's essentially the starting point. So the ordinance that the legal department is proposing doesn't cancel that out. That still stays in effect, and that's where all the processes will still begin. It's just that in the event that we end up with more particular situations where we need other avenues that we can pursue, or particularly imminently dangerous situations where we have funds set aside and we agree that we need to step in and abate the hazards, we can do that more expeditiously.
When you said funds set aside, on the last budget, did we set any money aside for?
So the $50,000 that you mentioned is actually a continual annual.
That was from what was budgeted 5 years ago, let's say? The 50,000 continue to carry forward, or what?
Right, so mayor and council, I guess, my understanding of it is that mayor and council established a fund for the abatement of dangerous buildings.
Right.
And so that continues. It doesn't roll over each year, but each year $50,000 is allocated towards the abatement of dangerous buildings. It's just been very hard to utilize and deploy because of what Ms. Ibarra said about, how untimely, some of these situations can be.
So, Ubar, do you want to learn how to write a letter? Top secret?
I want to
Chapter 5, Ubar. Chapter 5, right here.
He learned from Donald Trump.
Go ahead.
On this, you have here this recommendation, Chapter 5, Article 1 and Article 5. So Article 1 and Article 5 of these amendments that you presented here, that is in its entirety, the whole thing is the amendment?
I'm going to defer that question to Mr. Parra. I believe so.
So let me ask you another follow-up question based on what Mr. Anesian is asking. What role did you play, since you're responsible for this, what role did you play in developing these amendments?
So I worked with the legal department in terms of identifying the issues that we had, and we had several meetings discussing, how can we move forward in these particular situations, and they we worked together to craft some of the language and went back and forth with Mr. Massey and Mr. Parr and myself.
So did you read this Article 1 and Article 5 of Chapter 5?
I did.
So so my question again is this in its entirety all amendments?
To my understanding, yes.
But you're not sure?
I'm sure.
All right, so it's all in its entirety amendments.
It is. I just, it's illegal. So the item was agendized as a legal department issue, so I just wanted to have them have the final say. But
Yeah,
I hope that answers your question.
But the recommendation is that this is in its entirety is what you are recommending.
Yes,
Because this is your responsibility.
that is correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. Go ahead, Councilman.
Yeah, again, where it says penalty clause, it's still a Class 2 misdemeanor. I mean, Mr. Parra, Class 2 misdemeanor, you give somebody, you give Dr. Varona a Class 2 misdemeanor for cleaning up something or other. I mean, what happens then? I mean, he's not going to jail. He's not, can he be fined in a certain amount of money?
Absolutely.
How much can he be fined? I mean, I'm just saying, does it get somebody's attention? If you tell them, we're going to fine you $100, they're going to say, forget the $100. I mean, how much can you fine on a Class 2 misdemeanor?
Well, there's a fee schedule there, isn't there?
2,500.
There's a fee schedule there. It says, Section 5.2, adoption of building permit and inspection fees.
Yes.
Well, but those are fees.
Yeah. On a Class 1 misdemeanor, Mr. Mayor,
And a Class 2.
Councilman Hanesian, let me just address the question real quick. Well, I'll address your question, and then I'll try and answer Dr. Varona's question as well. Class 2 misdemeanor, on a Class 1 misdemeanor, you're looking at $2,500 maximum fine. Last I checked, I believe on a Class 1 misdemeanor. On a Class 2, if the city magistrate were to impose a full fine, I think at this point it's somewhere in the range of about $1,500 fine.
For a Class 2
Class
misdemeanor?
2 misdemeanor, right. It varies. Obviously, Class 1 misdemeanor is more serious than a Class 2 or a Class 3.
Right.
But again, what we have with this amendment is the ability to have alternate hammers. One hammer being the misdemeanor, another hammer being the civil complaint, where we have to go through the entire process to downstairs as well with a civil complaint. And the third hammer we have is an administrative hammer. And we didn't have that before. We didn't have that administrative hammer, and so this will allow us that.
And what exactly is the administrative hammer?
Well, the ability to be able to remove the violation after the notice to the owner and/or tenant, and record the lien on the property for the cost of the abatement.
And that's a Class 1.
No, that's again. So just look at it from this standpoint, Dr. Barona. You have three ways of dealing with a violation.
Mm-hmm.
One being proceeding with a criminal complaint for a Class 2 misdemeanor. Another method of filing a civil complaint and going through the full court process downstairs, and obviously winning a judgment and imposing that judgment. And then the third one being an administrative manner of dealing with it, which is, quite frankly, the more convenient way to do it, because we're able to get the results that Frank Dillon has been able to obtain without having this in the books. Now that we're going to have it in the books, he's going to have a third method to be able to deal with these landowners. And to his credit, I mean, he's very persistent, and he's worked well with the city manager, and things are getting done out there. Yeah, and I won't take credit for this. My colleague Mike Massey thought up this administrative manner of proceeding, and hopefully Mayor and Council will take it up at this point.
So, Mr. Pata, just to make sure I'm clarity, in this Article 1, Section 514, it mentions their Class 1 misdemeanor, $2,500.
I'm sorry.
Article 1, Section 514, it says guilty of a Class 1 misdemeanor. So what's the difference between you're saying Class 2 misdemeanor and now we're at a Class 1 misdemeanor at $2,500?
Page 4?
Page
4, 514.
514.
514,
So you can
okay.
bring
Failure to
clarity.
obey, order to abate. So the violation of this section is punishable by up to a maximum of 6 months in jail and by a maximum fine of $2,500 by probation up to 3 years.
For a Class 1. So we're in a Class
good.
1 now, the most serious.
Right. So within this amendment, we're now with the ability to impose a Class 1.
So why do we have a Class 2? First we start with a Class 2, and if they don't do it, we go to a Class 1?
I guess if we use, well, I don't guess, I know, if under this section, we are able to proceed with a Class 1 as opposed to the Class 2. If we want to be a little bit more lenient with a landowner, then we use that first method that I mentioned to you, which is
Class 2.
which is the Class 2
Okay.
by way of what we had in place before this ordinance.
So it's just a little bit stronger, the Class 1 then.
That's correct.
More serious.
That's correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood this. Thank you.
I guess, again, in the deal I mentioned, it said penalties. And it says a Class 2 misdemeanor.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't say Class 2 misdemeanor or Class 1 as decided by. Maybe you gotta read the whole thing complete here.
Yeah.
It's just a little confusing for us,
Right.
you know, being lay people. We start with a Class 2. I don't know how do we get
To a Class
to a
1.
Class 1 when we were talking about a Class 2 at $2,500. Now they can go to jail for 6 months and $2,500. But maybe Mr. Dillon can explain it to us.
No, maybe Mr. Massey can explain it.
Is
Mr. Massey, could you please
is that within state law? I mean,
Yes,
I've never
Mr. Mayor,
heard of
council
it.
members, good evening. The current
city code for chapter 5 already has a class 2 misdemeanor, but it's the only mechanism we have right now for enforcement. In other words, Mr. Dillon gives the letter, the property owner does nothing, and we don't want to say go to Superior Court to sue him for an injunction. We always have that option. We could file locally here in our city court a class 2 misdemeanor and initiate enforcement via the criminal class 2 misdemeanor. The class 1 misdemeanor comes in at the end of the civil process. So what this amendment does, it creates for the first time the ability for a law enforcement officer or a member of the building department, they can issue a civil citation, which is just like a traffic ticket, and serve it on the person, and then write a date down on the citation by when they have to go to court and respond. Then they can go to court and respond, and they can admit the violation or they can contest the violation. And if they contest, then it's set for a civil hearing. And if the judge, acting as the finder of fact, finds the violation, then what this amendment also does is it says, in addition to the judge imposing a civil fine, the judge will issue an order to abate the violation. So we're not just going to go after them for a fine, even though it's a civil process. The judge at the end of that process orders the abatement. And that's very important because now it's a judicial order. Then, if the property owner violates that order by taking no action, in addition to the judge possibly setting it up for an enforcement, say like a contempt matter because you're in contempt because you're not obeying the court order, the city would have at that point the option to file a class 1 misdemeanor, a follow-on. This is now not the ordinary person. This is a person who has gone through the process, has gotten an order to abate from a judge, and has still taken no action. At that point, the city attorney's office would have the ability to file class 1. But at the beginning, the class 1 is not an option. At the beginning, a class 2 is an option, a civil citation is an option, or this administrative mechanism could also be an option, which is we, through the building department, issue a notice of violation in order to abate. Within that notice, there would be a right to appeal. They can appeal to the Board of Appeals if they so choose. But if the appeal time runs and they don't appeal and they still don't take action, then at that point the city could unilaterally take action, abate the problem, and then at the end of that abatement activity, lien the property for the cost of the abatement.
But it says there's 6 months in jail. That pretty much goes from civil to criminal.
Correct. 6 months in jail is always a misdemeanor. Misdemeanor is a criminal. So at the beginning, the city attorney's office could file a class 2 if they just want.
But how do the courts rule on this? I mean, I've seen a lot of court rulings where the judge throws it out.
Well, the practical reality is on something like this, we would not probably even ask the judge to consider jail time. Okay, we would always be looking for enforcement, not for punishment.
If you told them there was a class 2 with 6 months in jail, but they'd get it corrected, right?
Maybe. You know, if the...
He's got an attorney.
It all depends who you're giving that order to.
He's got an attorney, he's going to say, yeah.
You know, we prosecute class 2 misdemeanors pretty routinely, and people commit class 2 misdemeanors all the time.
But on a property?
No, I'm just saying as far as criminal activity occurring within the city limits.
So, Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Dillon, how is this going to help you with the property across the street?
So, as Mr. Massey and Mr. Parra had mentioned, essentially what this does is it gives us different mechanisms to be able to proceed. Where I see this helping me is more in situations where, well, I mean, with the property across the street, essentially we could say that we have, you know, new mechanisms to take further civil action. We could, I believe we can take them to court now. Is that correct? If I'm understanding. But in situations where we need to get things done more expeditiously, for example, an emergency demolition and things like that, we don't have to worry about taking a long, slow process. We'll still have to notify people, but it allows for, you know, reasonable notification time depending on the situation. So if we have, you know, something that is clearly an imminent danger and going to cause harm to, you know, a citizen of Nogales or a visitor, we can actually, you know, we can provide notification, and if we're dealing with an unresponsive property owner, the city can choose to step in with the funds that it has set aside and abate the violation, and then proceed with further legal action to collect those funds.
Okay, well, Mr. Mayor, I think
Yes.
that I'm ready to move forward on this. I think I get the recommendation favoring the residents of Nogales here that this is going to give you an administrative tool so that there's more a functional authority to the letters that you send out.
That's correct.
And I think this is good because we need to clean up our city.
You know, I'm really glad that it wasn't something top secret like Mr. Hanesian had said. It was, you know, there was like a secret pill that Mr. Dillon was using on the other two buildings that we was going to use at the Walter Home building. You know, so no more. See, it was all here.
Yes, thank
It
God.
was all here.
He's
We
seen
just had to amend it
He
and
has seen the
fix it
light.
up.
He has seen the light.
Mr. Mayor, call for the question.
Yes, yes. I was going to say that. I move to approve.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Okay, you got it.
Mayor,
Yes.
since it was approved unanimous, would you like to waive the second reading
Yes.
by a motion?
My motion. Aye.
So move.
Second meeting. Wait. So move.
Second?
Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Do we have it?
Thank you, sir.
First and second reading.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Dillon, you got that pill now.
Thanks. No, yeah, no. Next time I'm gonna bring the pill to you guys. Next time you guys come.
Water.
No,
I put it
see,
in the water.
now he has that pill. All right.
I put it in the water here.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, this mee's adjourned.
No, we still got something else here.
What? No, I was just council reports. You guys want to go through that?
Yeah, I have something.
Okay, we're getting us to, you serious?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
Get used to it.
You know, it says mayor and council report. You know, I have a lot to say too, but I don't want to push it, but we'll
Well,
wait.
right now, in about 5 minutes,
Go ahead.
the Rachel Maddow show is
Go
going to start.
ahead.
and I'll-
We're going to go to council, mayor and council report. Go ahead.
Mayor, I just want you to know that this Wednesday, I attended a meeting that was there for a very important subject for me that I've been trying to get addressed by the Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors that affects the people of Nogales from the Efron Canyon flooding.
Yes.
And Dr. FedEx was there, so I just want to report to the council that Santa Cruz County has written up an application under FEMA for the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant Program, and that is a grant program that is funding for anything over $10 million. And the price for this retention pond, and the Efron Canyon application is for $11.4 million. And there's only one per state. And the state of Arizona took applications, and the state of Arizona came down here to make that, and they're recommending the Efron Canyon. Of all the ones in Arizona, they've picked the Efron Canyon project and all of that. So I think it's something that's good. Dr. FedEx was very positive, very inquisitive there. Thank you for your representation there and advocating for the residents of Nogales here. Where'd Mr. Massey go?
Is there anything we can do as a council?
Well, there is, Mayor, and I think I yield to Dr. FedEx.
Mayor and council members, what I did is I sent a letter of support in terms of helping with the matching requirements of 25%.
Okay.
So that
Yes.
it was required, that letter was required to be submitted before Friday so that we could move this along.
And it was great that, fine job that Dr. Felix did, Mr. Mayor. I want you to know. Very well thought out and everything. And the one thing that I want to point out, that along the Western Avenue corridor there, if we get the funding for this, 90% of the property will be off the floodplain zone, so they will not have to pay extra flood insurance. And when you sell a home, there's a lot of people that can't buy it because when you tack on the extra payment for the flood insurance, they're disqualified for it. So I think that's going to be a big plus for that. And then you can build onto your house more than the 50% of the footage right now because of that. So this is something big, Mayor, for this council.
Very good.
And I just wanted to bring it up so that Dr. Felix has jumped on it right away with that letter because they needed the letter. So I think that'll be a big plus if we can swing that through, Mayor.
Good. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have a,
Get the waterway.
Nubar, do you have anything to say on the
No,
council report?
I have nothing to say.
About the shutdown?
Nothing to say.
Yeah, anything about the shutdown?
I believe
About
that
the wall?
Donald Trump should say that it's an emergency. It should say that it's an emergency and go ahead and build a fan with a wall.
He needs a Quaalude. Chief, you have a Quaalude?
Do you have something to say? Go ahead.
Yeah, Mayor, I have asked Dr. Felix, I'm going up to Los Angeles on the 25th and 26th for regional meetings for Little League, and we're trying to get a positive feedback from them on giving us the tournament for another 3, maybe 5 years, and basically see what we could offer in improving our parks and all that. I know Marcel has been working on the lights and with Dr. Felix and all that. So
Well, if there's anything we can do as a council, you know, you got our support.
thank you, sir.
Yes.
I would just encourage the commissioner here on Little League, who does a lot, that I think it's time, with all of the experience that you have on this, that you start considering a bid with the help of the city to host a World Series down here. I think you can do it.
It's been juniors were offered to us last week.
Little League, yeah.
Yeah.
No, not the big World Series that they have. This one, they move around to different states and that.
It all depends, you know. Basically, it's all different divisions. You know, obviously the 11 and 12s that we see on TV will never.
No,
that's their base in Williamsport. But we tried it with the juniors last year, which they moved from actually they moved from Washington down to to Sacramento, California. And you know, whenever they're open, we're shooting for them.
Good. That's
Thank
good.
you.
Anybody else? No. Councilwoman?
No.
Councilman Rojas? Anything? I just want to say one thing. Hey, now since I listen to you, listen to me too. Councilwoman Lopez and myself, we attended the inaugural Doug Ducey. It was not as nice as ours, but it was good. It was a good inaugural. But the good thing about it, after the inaugural, we had an opportunity to speak to a couple of senators, and also one of the Andy Tobin. I don't know if any of you know Andy Tobin. Used to be the Speaker of the House.
ACC now.
Yes, he has plans of coming down to Nogales, and he wants to talk to us about energy. So I don't know if there's something here that we don't know, but he knows something that I think he needs to address with us here at the city. So hopefully he'll be visiting us soon.
Good, that's a good report.
I don't know about, you know, they have a lot to do with the building process, you know, with the utility companies and stuff, but I don't know if there's something going on. Nubar was mentioning it could be the service line, Nubar?
Service line,
yeah. So we'll see what it is, but it was good. It was a good trip, and it's a good networking that we did. So besides that,
That's it.
yes.
Thank you.
David. Means adjourned.
Oh, yes.
Marcy's buying at the VFW.
It's a power line that they're going to
Yes,
ACC,
yeah.
and Mexico's going to pay for